but I could not. So I missed it this year, but maybe I can make it next year.
Yeah, that'd be great. Love to
But
have you.
I could not. So I missed it this year, but maybe I can make it next year.
Yeah, that'd be great. Love to
But
have you.
I could not. So
So,
I missed it this year, but maybe I can make it next year.
yeah, that'd be great. Love to
But
have you.
I could not. So
So,
I missed it this year, but maybe I can make it next year.
Well, who knows? Here we are. Uh, Robert, it's yours.
Okay, I'd like to set the scene for our discussion of Saint Augustine. And can you make the slide the full screen?
Uh,
If
yeah.
we can, as you work on that, I'll keep talking. So I'd like you to set the scene about what the status of the Christian faith is by the time that Augustine is born it's actually, I think, 354. And um, the Edict of Milan in 313 provided for tolerance for Christians in the Roman Empire. They had been under siege. They had been killed. They had been crucified, sometimes upside down in Rome. They were not popular because they would not bend the knee to Caesar. The only Lord they had, the only Caesar they had would be Christ. Then in 325, as Brent has already alluded to, 1700 years ago, Constantine made basically um, it finally got codified that Christianity was going to be the official religion of the Roman Empire. He does this over in what is now Istanbul, that had been named eventually Constantinople after him. In 325 is when the Nicene Creed was finalized at the Council of Nicaea. Constantine comes to power before that, but by this time at 325, with the Nicene Creed being kind of codified, if you will, made official, this is, one of the earliest creeds, not the earliest, but one of the earliest creeds of the church. Here's what you believe, here's what we believe, here's what you say you believe, and then they would recite it in churches everywhere. So, um, by the time that Augustine is born, Athanasius in 367, when Augustine is about 13, Athanasius, one of the bishops of the church at that time, one of the leaders, understood to be one of the fathers of the church, said, "Here are the 27 books of the New Testament." And he said that in an Easter letter in 367. Now, that doesn't make it official. It doesn't get to be official until the Council of Trent over 1,200 years later, or almost 1,200 years later, when the Catholic Bible is finally settled. But Athanasius describes what we now call our New Testament. No Apocrypha or anything else, just the 27 books that we read as the New Testament. He does that in 367. Then in 393, there's a synod go back to the first slide. Yeah, first slide. In 393, Augustine is at a synod of Hippo, and also 397, the synod of Carthage. Um, and in those 5 years, basically, Augustine will say himself, the canon is closed. What I'm trying to point out is that the Christian faith has been dynamic, very dynamic over its entire history. And we see this black book that has Holy Bible written in English. And there's some people really who believe this, that I believe every jot and tittle of the Bible just as it was written in the original King James English, which it wasn't. It was written in Aramaic. It was written in Hebrew, the Hebrew Bible portion. It was written in Koine Greek. It was translated later, and especially into Latin. Um, the Council of Trent will finally make everything official about the Catholic Bible. And the church will now no longer, because that Rome is officially endorsing Christianity, what happens? Well, Christians are no longer illegal, right? They're not getting murdered. They're not getting coerced into disavowing their faith. There are new questions now. One of the questions that was present during the first couple of hundred years is, well, when is Jesus coming back? Well, they said he said he would be back. Where is he? When is this happening? And by the way, what do we do about the Jews? They refuse to believe us. Now, Jesus was a Jew, we know that, but what do we do? I just want to set all of that into the context of where we're going to go with Augustine. By the end of the 4th century, which is the 300s, by the way, it would be natural for Christians to ask and discuss the lack of fulfillment of the second coming, the question about relationships with the Jewish community and other non-Christian communities, and how do we make our way through this? Well, here comes people like Athanasius, Ambrose, Augustine, eventually Aquinas, lots of A's there, right? And they will be thinking and writing, theologizing, and Augustine is one of the very, very first, and he will eventually be called a doctor of grace. And you see here an icon of him with one of his most famous statements. The one that everybody remembers is not this one. The one that everybody remembers is, "Oh Lord, please make me chaste, but just not yet." Okay? And we'll get into that, why he said that. All right? But this is one of his more famous statements. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you, or thee. But he wrote it in Latin originally. So next slide. We're going to see a little video here. If you can click us into that, Brent. And
Bishop of Hippo. Born in North Africa in the middle of the 4th century.
Let me make sure I'm sharing it.
Yeah, it's very, very brief. And I think it'll give you a little taste.
He is without a doubt the single most influential figure in Western Christianity. Now, that's a pretty sweeping statement, but it's hard to say enough about St. Augustine. He's cited more than any other person in the Church's dogmatic pronouncements. Even our modern Catechism of the Catholic Church references his name more than anyone else aside from the biblical authors. A prolific writer and profound thinker, Augustine left behind an immense treasury of writings that goes well beyond his famous Confessions and City of God. Simply stated, he is the peak of patristic achievement. Now that said, if you were to hang out with him in his younger years late in the 4th century, you weren't thinking future saint. It wasn't even close to apparent that this paragon of the Christian faith would ever serve as a guide into the mysteries of Christ. In fact, the reason he published a book titled Confessions in the first place was because he needed to make one. For many years, he lived a life that would cause even many of us to blush. Many people don't know that Augustine was a teenage dad. He fathered an illegitimate son when he was only 17, and he continued to live with the child's mother for the next 17 years. In fact, one of his more famous lines when he was still resisting the pull of God was, "Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet." Now you can imagine the tears that were shed by his mother, St. Monica, as she prayed for her son's conversion. Propelled by her constant intercession and the influence of the great St. Ambrose of Milan, Augustine eventually found his way into the Catholic faith. Today, he's one of our greatest saints and champions. If you remember, In our previous discussion about typology, we quoted a line from Augustine. The New Testament is concealed in the Old, and the Old Testament is revealed in the New. But he went further. Augustine also clearly understood there is a unity not just between the two testaments, but also between the Bible and the sacraments. And this relationship wasn't something incidental, but central to Christianity.
So, Brent, if you would go back to the very first slide and let me point out something about it. You see depicted this figure of St. Augustine. He is not European looking. There's a reason for this. He's born in Africa. He's born of, and we'll get into his biography in a minute, but the depictions of Augustine are about 95% wrong. They depict him as a European, sometimes fair-headed, sometimes a very light-skinned person. And this is the influence of all the European painting and the art that goes on, especially in the Renaissance and other periods as well. But they are wrong in their depiction of him. And icons like this or iconography like this presentation here is closer to being accurate, okay? So now let's go to the next slide. Next slide, yeah. He's born Aurelius Augustinus. We say Augustine. He's the third child of Monica, a Berber. 13, I'm sorry. I've got this wrong, don't I? Well, if it's the 13th, it's the same birthday as as Buck O'Neill. And I'm going to do a very quick check of this as I keep talking. But my goodness, I've made a big boo-boo on the first line in terms of his date of birth. My bad. It is the 13th. I have the title page wrong. This is correct. So he is born on Buck O'Neill's birthday, about 45 miles south of the Mediterranean. And I put the map here so you could see it a little bit and get it in perspective. And his father is a Roman colonist. In the Catholic presentations of Augustine, he's always described as a pagan. He eventually will convert to Christianity, but I think it would be better to say he's a non-believer. Pagan almost always, not almost, but it too frequently connotes licentiousness, random, unethical, etc. It'd be better to say that he's a colonist from Rome. And Brent, would you like to say something about the Berber culture and the Berber community in North Africa?
Yes, the father of my two nieces, my sister Dana is a Berber, and it's a Berber tribal language, and actually there's almost like an independence movement now in North Africa. You can see a Berber flag. There's a new emphasis on teaching Berber as a language. So this is Algeria and this is northern Morocco. And these were basically mountain and tribal people.
And they are understood to be African, not African American, but African.
Right.
They have dark complexion. Brent's sister does not because she's adopted into the Berber culture, but they are dark complected. They would be understood to be, if somebody immigrated to the United States and just was in a crowd, they'd be looked upon as African American if they were a citizen. So he becomes seriously ill at the age of 7, but recovers. He will recount all this in his very famous book, Confessions, The Confessions. Monica, his mother, is very devout. The first controlling mother that we have a big history of. And she attempts to guide him toward the Christian path, but he leads a pretty wayward life. His parents send him at the age of 12 to a school in Madara, and you could see that on the Numidia map at the bottom, and where he falls in love with learning by reading Virgil. This is very important. At the age of 12, he's reading Virgil, and he's captivated by the life of the mind, as it were. I'm not sure how much you can do that at the age of 12, but he likes to think about things. He's interested in learning, understanding things. His school funds run out when he's 16 and he returns to Carthage. Next slide. Um, his father, Patricius, is ill and makes his Christian faith and is baptized, and then he dies. And Augustine is 17. When he's 18, he takes a mistress. And by the way, he writes full-blown descriptions of his lustfulness in his autobiography, The Confessions. His son, uh, Odiadatus, which means gift of God, is born. And his father being gone and the funds for school gone, a man named Romanianus becomes his patron and pays for him to go to school back at Carthage, where he's reading again. And he reads Cicero's treatise Hortensius and is inspired to pursue philosophy. And also, he becomes an expert in eloquence and rhetoric. Um, he returns home to teach in 375. He's 21. He will then also kind of take up the Bible at this point, and he's investigating the text, and he views the Bible as very inferior compared to what he reads in Cicero. Cicero is a master rhetorician, and he was eloquent. And the Bible in the Vulgate form that he receives it and reads it is, kind of crude and rough. And he also looks at the stories of all the killings and murders and bloodshed and wars and Bathsheba and David and all of this. And he goes, oh my goodness, this is inferior to what he reads in Cicero. He leaves Africa to seek his fortune in Rome, and he is attractive to Manichaeism, which is a form of Gnosticism and believes in kind of secret knowledge, and it can be mystical. And he signs up as a learner. He's very attracted to this Manichaeism. He's appointed at the age of 30 as the chief professor of rhetoric for the city of Milan, then the capital city of the empire in the West. At the same time, very providentially, Presbyterians would say this, and even Augustine would say it probably, he meets Bishop Ambrose. And this is a very, very big impact on his life. Ambrose is smarty pants smart. He's charismatic, and his mother moves from Africa and persuades him to give up his mistress and to get married. But it's going to be an arranged marriage, and he has to wait 2 years before the girl becomes of age to marry. And in that interim time, he takes up another mistress. He cannot help himself, as it were. 2 years later, he gives up his academic post and retires to a country villa. This is where Ambrose, I think, is working on the direction of his life. Not intentionally, just by invitation and by encouragement. He goes to Cassiacum, now Cassiago, northeast of Milan, with his mother, his son, his brother, two persons that he's taking care of from back in North Africa, and two cousins and a small corps of pupils. He will convert in the August of that year to Christianity. The Christianity that he is conforming himself to is almost monastic. He wants to be in community. By the way, the woman who is his mistress is nameless. If you ever see her named, that's a made up fiction that he never names her ever. And he divorced her, as it were, but not officially divorced. He gave up the relationship and kicked her out himself. She did not abandon him. She did not leave. He left her. And he wants to kind of live in a monastic way. He's baptized by Ambrose. He's 33. Monica dies and is buried in Ostia. He goes back to Africa. And 3 years later, his son dies at the age of 17. Uh, he's in Hippo there, and crowds of people are attracted to him because he can speak well, he can reason well, he's very obviously smart. And Valerius, Bishop of Hippo, upon hearing about him and then meeting him, ordains him immediately. There's no big examination, there's no period of waiting. And then 4 years later, Valerius makes him kind of the coadjutor bishop, kind of second in charge. And then a year later, he's consecrated as Bishop of Hippo. By the way, frequently St. Augustine is called St. Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine of Hippo. Well, why? Well, there's another St. Augustine who was the first Bishop of Canterbury in England. And helps to distinguish these two. And that guy was not African. That guy was European. 397, he writes a religious rule for common life. And this common life is very monastic in its orientation. It seems to be. And he will publish the first of 3 volumes of what comes to be known on Christian doctrine. Next slide. He publishes 13 books of his confessions between 397 and 400. And this is an account of his life from the beginning of it up to just right after his conversion. In 410, exhaustion forces him to take some time off, have a little vacation in the country. His eventual writing output becomes vast. 5 million words, 113 surviving books. Now, some of these are not long books, but they're still books and treatises, 200 letters, and more than 500 sermons. I'm going to indicate another place where you can get access to almost all of these in translation. I think it's Georgetown University has access to all this, and I'll give you the link to that access. He adds the 4th volume of Christian Doctrine in 426, and then he edits and corrects and changes, and he goes through all 93 of his books up to that time. There are 232 bound volumes. Next slide. Why was he doing all that? I think he sensed that he was coming to the end, and he was very meticulous about his thinking and his writing, and he wanted to make sure he had it right. He dies in Hippo on the 28th of August. His remains are moved to Cagliari, Sardinia, and he's canonized by popular acclaim. So his body was in Africa, then it's moved to Sardinia, and then eventually it's moved to a church called in English, St. Peter in the Golden Sky, or San Pietro in Ciel de Oro in Rome. And that is the picture on the far right. That's the interior of the church, and where his remains abide now. In 1244, some 500 years plus later, Pope Innocent IV will approve the founding of the Order of St. Augustine. Remember, he wrote the rule for a common life shared with brothers, And we'll see somebody who's a part of that in just a moment. Um, Pope Boniface the Eighth includes him among the first group of four proclaimed as doctors of the church, and the others are Ambrose, Jerome, Pope Gregory, and Augustine himself. So he is esteemed mightily throughout the intellectual world, and also not just by Catholics, but by Protestants and non-Christians as well. Augustine bridged the gap between ancient pagan Rome and the Christian Middle Ages. This is a Catholic, James J. O'Donnell says. He is the first great Christian philosopher, and that is absolutely true. I love this by historian Pelikan, Yaroslav Pelikan, one of the greatest historians we have about church history. Perhaps not the greatest of Latin writers, but almost certainly the greatest man who ever wrote Latin. And by the way, he wrote all those books by hand, okay? And then they were inscribed on parchment, possibly, and then copied and copied and copied because the printing press had not been invented. Remember that. And then Harold Bloom, who's an intellectual's intellectual, called him the first great reader. And that is true. I mean, he read voraciously all the time. Next slide. So how is he remembered? He's remembered in icons, like the iconography in the upper left hand corner. He's remembered at that church in Rome where his remains abide. He's remembered in the Philippines where his son, Adeodatus, is remembered, and there's the unnamed mistress, and then standing is Augustine. He's remembered at St. Augustine High School, and you see there the St. Augustine High School Marching 100. Um, what's so special about them? This is the oldest African American Catholic high school in the United States, and it's in New Orleans, right on Esplanade. And you can go there, you can go to church. I have some great stories. If we have time at the end, I'll tell you a great story about when Priscilla and I celebrated our anniversary down there. And this band was the one that went to D-Day, I think on what would that been, the 80th, not the 80th anniversary, the 75th anniversary of D-Day. They played at Normandy, and they were a band that was invited there. But maybe the most famous way that we're remembering Augustine, and maybe you didn't even know that there was an order, is because Pope Leo, the newly elected Pope, is an Augustinian, if you will, or an Augustin. He's from this order, and he abides by the rule of life that St. Augustine created. Next slide. He's also remembered in edifices around the world, the Basilica of St. Augustine in Algeria. I wondered, Brent, if you or anybody who's visited Africa that's maybe in attendance today has been at that church or that basilica. But he's remembered in Detroit at a Catholic church there, Holy Rosary Catholic Church in Indianapolis, a church in France, in Belgium. This is with the Ursuline order, and then also in the Czech Republic by a bridge there in Prague, but also right here in Kansas City. I think it's Benton Boulevard, I think, is where St. Augustine Episcopal Church abides, right here in Kansas City, Missouri. And one of my friends, oh boy, Mrs. Myers, Mary Ann Myers, was a stalwart member there for years and years and years. Next slide. Where do we start with regard to books? I want to suggest that you read the Confessions. That would be the best place. It'll be a thick book because it's 13 little books all combined into one volume. Or the other one right next to it, which is Augustine's book, The City of God. He believed there was kind of two cities, the city of man and the city of God. And the city of man should be seeking to be more like the city of God. This has an introduction by Thomas Merton, and that's why I recommend that one. Next slide. There's also books about St. Augustine. And uh, go look up Gary Wills. Somebody get on their computer or their phone, look on Amazon and see how much that book cost. I think there's a flaw in their algorithm. I think it's the Kindle version is 700 and some odd dollars. Check that out. Don't buy that. Just go to your library. But Gary Wills is a Catholic. He's an intellectual's intellectual and a very, very, very good writer. Henry Chadwick's biography, Augustine of Hippo, A Life, it is very good. They get the cover wrong. It's bad. It's not a European guy that they should be depicting. The book called Augustine Through the Ages, an encyclopedia, is absolutely wonderful. And then Pelican's The Mystery, what's it called? The Mystery of Contingency. So let me see here. So next is the next slide.
Hey, Bob, I got Gary Wills down at $13.47.
I see the algorithms. Okay, that's on Kindle or in that paperback?
Hardcover.
Hardcover. I'd say buy it. Buy it right now before it goes back to $700.
There's only one left in stock, and you can get it by July 1st.
Well, at any rate, that's a very good book. And I don't, how do these things happen? I don't know. I should have taken a screenshot of that and saved it. Anyway, next slide. There's some internet resources that are wonderful to read. The Augustine and slavery text is very current from last September. But these three below that, Augustine texts and translations and the Rule of Augustine, these are both available through Georgetown University. And this, you can read it online, all of the confessions, the City of God, on Christian doctrine, and sermons and more. I mean, it's got access to all of this stuff. And then the Rule of Augustine, available through Georgetown. You can read all the details of that, but I'm going to show you an outline of the rule in just a minute. The other thing is the confessions in Ascension Press is also available online through that link. Through that, I forgot to put the link in there. I'm sorry, but the confessions are available through Ascension Press. You can find that easily on the internet. Next, there's also films and videos. I don't think there are very many good ones. I do like this one in the middle, The Unlikely Saint, Saint You Should Know, Augustine of Hippo. And it is brief, and it's done by a Franciscan friar who's witty and funny, and it's a good introduction. The one above, the St. Augustine, The Voice for All Generations, tries, I think, to downplay the life of debauchery that St. Augustine lived. I think they like to refer to it, but they don't go into the specifics. They try to make him say he kind of came to his senses, and he did. St. Augustine did, but it's a little too pious for my taste, I think. By the way, that figure there where it says, you see that St. Augustine is holding a heart in his hand in the top figure. That's the cover or the symbol on the internet for that link. And the flaming heart refers to the passion that St. Augustine had for learning, the passion for life, and the passion that he thought people should seek out after God. Remember his phrase, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. He had theological battles, and they were he was in the thick of it, and they were very present. He won all of them, and the church did take his lead and followed after his example. The Manichaeans, remember, he was very attracted to them, but they believed in this Gnostic division between light and dark, a God world and a Satan world, a good and evil dualism. And it almost gave too much power to the dark, to Satan, to the evil. And he believed in the unity of the world and the unity of God against this Gnostic belief. By the way, there's something in the Manichaeist and also in the Donatist that believes that they have the truth and only they have the truth, or at least they're special, and the rest of us are not special and can't know or don't know or won't know what's really going on. He battled against the Donatists, and this is very important. How many in the room have ever read or heard about Graham Greene's book, The Power and the Glory? Have you ever heard that? Well, it's about a priest who's less than pure, and he is known as the whiskey priest, and he's an archetype of the person who's unpure yet still administers the sacraments, still preaches. And Augustine would like that because he didn't believe that the vessel disallowed or disqualified somebody from being a conveyance of grace and the gifts of God. The authenticating power of the gospel lies outside the limitations of those who believe it. But that's not what the Donatists believed. They believed only pure people. Why was this important? Well, a bunch of Christians were forced to disavow their faith, decry Jesus, give over their holy books, or if they had any, relics or even things that they did church with, and disavow any kind of connection. Well, if they were now Christianity was going to be part of the Roman Empire, it was official, it was acceptable. Now, how do we let these people back into good graces? The Donatists didn't want to let them back in. No, no, they had to be rebaptized. They had to go through moral instruction because they had disavowed their faith. Augustine was against that. He was also against the Pelagians.
Very short.
Excuse me?
That's my sister calling.
Oh, okay. He was against the Pelagians because of his emphasis on God's grace alone. This is a very Protestant perspective, by the way. There is no moral perfectibility, which Pelagius believed in. And he believed in free will, but he also believed that we could become kind of almost perfect. There's several other things that he believed in. That he didn't believe in. He didn't believe in original sin, which Augustine was pretty much the originator of this concept. He didn't believe in the virgin birth, and he didn't believe in predestination, all of which Augustine believed in. Now let's look at Augustine's monumental contributions. He's one of the main sources for the entrenchment of the Trinity as a central Christian concept. Okay, we have it in the Bible. It's there in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We have that, and it's developed in the New Testament, so you can see it. But he made it into a big theological category and concept. He originated the terms of the just war, which Thomas Aquinas would develop into a full-blown apologia for Christian participation in the war. And just as a brief outline of that, is the cause just? Is there proper authority? Is there right intention? Is it a last resort? Is there a reasonable hope of success? And is proportionality between ends and means? So you all can have another whole hour to discuss just war in terms of the Vietnam War, in terms of the Korean War, in terms of World War II, and maybe even in terms of what took place yesterday. He adapted classical thought to Christian teaching. This is his use of Cicero. He also read Plato. He knew all of the classic kind of base level, the foundations of Western civilization, but he's one that really, really melded the two into together. Like the Apostle Paul before him, he emphasized the before and after mode of Christian conversion. I heard Fred Craddock one time say, it's like you take a machete and you slice the watermelon into before and after, right? That's Paul's experience on the road to Damascus. That was also Augustine's experience when he finally came to faith at the age of 30. Next slide. His prodigious writing, as I said, 5 million words, provided 16 plus generations with inspiration and understanding of the development of Christian thought. The Confessions alone is maybe memorable. If he had done only that, he would have created a new kind of genre, if you will, spiritual autobiography. This is why we can listen to somebody like Fred Buechner or Anne Lamott, all right, or Maya Angelou. They write spiritual autobiographies, if you will. And the first one, though, is Augustine. And because of his African origins, his name is proudly affixed to countless African American parishes, especially Catholic and Episcopal churches, who honor him with feast days. Then the rule of Augustine, you'll get this on the slide deck, and I'll send the corrected date, Brent, later for that opening page. I had the birth date wrong, but just if you send this out to the class, this is the rule of Augustine, but also it is Pope Leo's rule. He lives by this, and on the first days of his papacy, he was having breakfast and lunch and having conversations with his brothers in the Augustine house, I think, there in Rome. There's some problems with Augustine, and I'll try to be very quick about this. Next slide. We have problems with anti-Judaism and what is called supersessionism. That is, the Christians replaced Jews. Christians kind of replaced Jews as the favored people, and Jews are allowed to survive as a warning to Christians. He quoted Psalm 69 that people in charge with regard to the Jews should bend down their backs forever. And then he has this quote, Judaism since Christ is a corruption. Indeed, Judas is the image of the Jewish people. Their understanding of Scripture is carnal. They bear the guilt for the death of the Savior, for through their fathers they have killed Christ. By the way, there's a new book that challenges him being an anti-Semite, but you can't get away from some of these quotes that he has. He is anti-Judaism to some degree, maybe not to full bore degree. And he defended a Jew in Hippo from being ripped off in a civil suit, by the way. And a lot of people point to that as his large-heartedness and open-mindedness, but he still wrote some very anti-Judaic things. The house of Israel, which God has cast off, are themselves the builders of destruction. You can only imagine what Hitler and other anti-Semites would do with these quotes. There's also problems with his concept of original sin's transmission. And he said it was through concupiscence, meaning sinful lust. The reason that Mary could bear Jesus was because she was not inseminated with evil, and that evil is transmitted through the very sex act itself. I find this very, very troublesome. I don't mind talking about the sinful inclination that we seem to have. Look at any child who gets real greedy or gets real, fussy, and then see how we act out those childish kind of ways later. Um, and I believe evil is in the world, no doubt about it. But that to make sex um, the transmission mode for sin is just troublesome to me. He quotes Psalm 51, which is the Ash Wednesday text par excellence, but it says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." So he was brought forth as a sinful thing, and his mother conceived him in sin. Ask any mother about, did they conceive their child in sin? I don't think that, very many mothers will agree to that. He had an endorsement of slavery, by the way, that it was God's punishment for sin and that slave holders should lead the slaves to abide in Christian faith and to convert. But he never said, then free them. He never did say what even Paul said. Paul endorses slavery as well, by silence as well. Um, so this is a problem for Augustine from my perspective. And also, he endorsed coercion in terms of approving punishment and controlling over lawbreakers. And remember that theologians and bishops had a kind of civic role in this culture as well as a religious role. So there we have it. And I've talked a lot, but we do have a few times for questions. I left that last picture. Can you go to that last slide? If I was going to put a picture of Augustine on my wall, I put this one on the upper right-hand corner. The one in the lower left-hand corner is the oldest depiction that we have of St. Augustine. But the one in the right shows his Africanness, if you will. And I love this. It's very colorful. He looks like a warm-hearted person as well as wise. There's always a book near or in Augustine's hands, if not a pen also that he's writing with. So time's yours. We can go to the class, however you want to do this. We've got about 7 minutes. Oh boy.
Questions, anyone? We're unmuted.
How
Hi.
many of you have heard of St. Augustine before?
Most everybody has their hand up.
Great. That's
Yeah.
good.
And it was last Sunday when it dawned on us that St. Augustine was the Augustine of the Augustinian priest who is now our Pope Leo.
Oh, great.
We had
Good.
not made that connection until we were talking about waiting to hear from you this Sunday. So
By the way, guess who else was an Augustinian or Augustine?
Who?
Martin Luther.
Oh.
Martin Luther was also of that order.
It's not an order we hear a lot about as an order.
It's not like the Jesuits
Right.
or the Dominicans.
Right.
There's or the Benedictine. They're the oldest and one of the biggest.
Well, I have a question. He's known as Saint Augustine. Is this obviously he's older than most people? Did he have to have proven miracles or anything like today is considered needed to become a saint?
I don't think so.
Uh-oh. Bob, you're frozen.
It's gotta be from his end.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Brent's moving.
We'll see if Bob comes back here in a second. Well, while we're waiting for Bob to return, um, actually, out of all the things, I think he may be rejoining. Out of all the things that Bob has presented it, I mean, this one kind of falls for me, somebody who I thought I knew who I really didn't.
Yeah.
You know, Bob has presented some people like, I don't even know who this name is, and I don't even know what their story is, but you know, you have this sort of sense, but the biographic part of it all, pretty astounding to me.
In what way do you mean, Brent?
Well, his Africanness. I mean, I always thought, this was somebody who was from Europe. This notion of his confessions, uh, his early, understandings at the Christian church in the third century. There's some question about whether it would really survive and what it did. And so he was just in there reading a lot and writing a lot and kind of laying down doctrines or considerations which are still evident into the church today.
Yeah, one of the other questions I was going to ask him was if the misrepresentations of St. Augustine are likely intentional or be confused with Augustine of Canterbury. How, I don't know how to word that. Is it because of his Africanness that they were uncomfortable with that and wanted everything to be European because that was such the source of the church? Does that make sense?
Are you talking about the artists or the?
Yeah.
Well, don't you think they were just painting what they knew?
Yeah, well, that's my point.
Yeah, I think that's
Was
the way I
it,
take
is there any indication that it was intentional, or was it just because that was the
That's
center of the world
that's
at
what I
that
would
point,
think.
perceived
I don't
to
know.
be? I don't know either. I don't know if anyone does. That was kind of where I was going. Does
But as
anyone
it was
know?
going along, I was thinking they're painting what they know. They're painting what they see.
Mhm.
Right,
It's definitely originated
right,
in deception.
Right.
So,
but maybe they didn't know it was that
I don't
way.
know.
I don't either.
How do we know?
Well, that's why I was asking him if he knew if there was any evidence one way or the other, if there was any, because he made a point of clarifying at the beginning, the reason he's often known as St. Augustine of Hippo is to distinguish him from St. Augustine of Canterbury,
Right, right.
who was clearly European,
Right.
apparently. So,
Interesting.
One of the interesting things that I oftentimes get a chance to talk about is there's so many depictions of God in the Bible as a white man, blonde hair, blue eyes, like holding the world in his hands. And I just think, well, if you look at the image, okay, but if you stop there, I guess that's the issue. You have to read the word. So if you read the word and you read where Mary was from,
well, I don't think the Bible ever says God is white with blonde hair and blue eyes.
that's precisely my point.
I mean, so
That is precisely my point.
it is certain versions and editions that are sold with those pictures,
Mhm.
but that does not come from the text.
Right. And so it's
Even
like
though the text has been, as we know,
Translated, yeah.
translated and brought down over the years, there's nothing.
read.
Saying there he was fair, but that doesn't mean blonde hair, blue eyed.
I think even before you get there to Revelations
No.
where it talks about what he looks like, that was a dream, by the way, John's dream.
Yeah.
But the point that I'm making is if you read the story of Jesus without seeing any photos, his mother's from Bethlehem.
Mhm.
Look at what those people look like.
Right.
That's my point. So
Well,
before
no,
you
I
even
agree.
go
Yeah.
into right. You know what I mean? So it's just like, and so when we ask the questions, did they know? It's like, I have to ask, did they read?
Well, see, but that's my point, Anthony, is that a lot of people don't geographically know where Bethlehem is. They are geographically challenged.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? And so, yeah, you can read that, but not everyone goes to a map to look it up.
Mhm.
And that's why I'm asking is, is there any evidence anywhere? Do we have any writings of
I
anyone
think
or,
it's ignorance.
well,
Oh, absolutely.
Point point of reference. I was just thinking, the depictions, as you said, lots of times, number one, they didn't have all of the video type things that we know now that we can see other countries. We have phones, we have this, that, and the other. We can see depictions of other places. It reminds me of when I used to have my kids at school draw trees. Truly, the trees that they knew were the trees that they had seen. These kids in Blue Springs had not seen palm trees or really giant fir trees, and
Right.
things
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And so that's just one thought that I would possibly say about some earlier depictions of a lot of people.
Well,
Joy?
maybe some of the depictions were based on people they knew.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
like the Jewish people I know, or that I grew up around, they were all fair skinned. They might have dark hair, and there might be maybe some sort of stereotypical noses or some facial features, but the skin
Yeah.
itself, I never noticed it as being
Oh.
dark. So they might have drawn based on Jewish people they had met that
So-
weren't dark.
Well, most Israelis aren't dark.
Yeah, you know.
So what are you sharing, Brent?
Well, that's my niece, Miriam.
So-
And so her mother would be, I'm going to admit Bob back in here. She is the child of my sister, who would like a German heritage, and her father is Berber. So to Bob's, particular, story is that St. Augustine was the mother was Berber, and the father was somebody who came from
Rome.
Europe. So this is kind of the complexion. Bob's back, and I want to give Bob the time, but Anthony asked me the question, is that why doesn't she consider herself African American? Because she's not sub-Saharan, and this is the part of Morocco that interacted with Europe. She has dual citizenship, but that's a conversation for another day. So Robert, you're back on.
Okay. We can do questions and answers or whatever you want.
Yep. If you could actually go back to the photo of your niece.
Well, okay.
All right. So in this room, we've used the term fair-skinned a few times, and Bob, you may have used it too as you were sharing. So in my upbringing as a Black person, fair-skinned did not mean white.
No.
No,
At
no,
all.
no.
It meant a lighter complected Black person.
Right?
And so when I think of fair-skinned, I do think of a person that looks like your niece. And to me, this is what I see whenever I look at people that are North African. I do know North African people, not because of my wife, but
Right.
just because I know them. And this is what they look like. And so we were having a discussion, Bob, in your absence, about how did we get to a white God, white Jesus in the Bible, how it changes Bible to Bible or translation to translation. And my question was, did they read the Bible story, the birth of Jesus, and how Mary was from Bethlehem? And so we kind of talked about whether it was a deliberate deterrence from truth, or if it were just people were literally trying to express their best reflection of what God would
know.
look like.
What they know.
And so I don't think we're necessarily settled on the answer to that, or if we can discover it in this context yet. But for me, again, it goes back to how studied a person is going to be. If you know geography, Bethlehem is a place that has melanated people, deeply melanated people. And so to have a picture of someone with blonde hair and blue eyes while a text reads, they were born in Bethlehem is obviously a contradiction. Can you speak?
Well, I can make it's pretty simple to me. I think it is a combination of both things, Anthony. I think it's a deliberate distortion of the truth because of the desire to maintain power in the culture where they are and to maintain control over the narrative. I'm not saying that people do that now per se, but I do think it infiltrated the culture in Europe. I think it infiltrated what Constantine did,
Whatever.
in terms of his overpowering everybody and making, after a while, people were made to be Christians. They were killed. I mean, the oh boy, I'm losing the term for the Crusades were brutal and murderous, as well as being, kind of well-intentioned, wanting to convert everybody to Christ. But there were people who were put to the sword if they would not recant their Islam faith, their Judaism, and they were murdered at the point of Christians.
Yep.
I mean, we have to be honest about that. These are verified facts in our history. Now, with regard to race, I think that um, every culture adopts Jesus as their own and makes it into a likeness so that they can relate to Jesus as an authoritative, loving figure. That's what Europeans did. That's what Africans did. That's what Chinese did. There's lots of pictures of Zacchaeus, and I did one when I preached once there at First Christian Church in Independence, where Zacchaeus was depicted in Chinese figures. You know, the whole world adopted Zacchaeus as, oh yeah, he's like us. He's an outsider looking in. So white people do it, black people do it, Latinos do it. This is explains in part the great Guadalupe phenomenon that Christ didn't come or through the Virgin Mary and appear to Cortez the conqueror. No, it was to the peasant in the field. It was the poor people. And the New Testament shows, I think, pretty plainly that that's how Christ came, was to poor people. That's more, I like the shepherd story more than I like the Magi story, but we have a compilation on our mantelpieces, don't we, of all of the gospel narratives together. But I think it's a combination, Anthony, of intentional, power-driven distortion of the truth about what complexion the original characters in our story are, and also an attempt to adapt so that we can connect to the humanity of the people we're following. To not just the humanity, but they can be like us. Irenaeus, one of the early church fathers, said, God through Christ became like us so that we might become like him. And I like that quote. And I think that's right.
Is that attitude or is that complexion?
Well, I think it's attitude and it's spirit. It's the spirit of the person. We can never be, I can, as a white person, I can never become a Bethlehemite, to use Anthony's terminology. I can't become a person with that much melanin. I don't have it in, well, probably if I did Louis Gates's DNA stuff and looking into my past, I probably have some melanin content more than I have now, but I can't become black.
Right, but you could become a Bethlehemite if you were born there. That's what
Yeah,
I'm going to jump in and say.
yeah,
it
not
depends on how we
racially.
define things, because
Remember
if
that
we're
race
careful and put it all together, that's an issue.
race is an artificial construct
Absolutely.
created, by the way, mostly by white people
Yep.
Yeah.
to impose power control.
Yep.
And I really appreciate that arrival. And I wanted to really kind of steer it from there because I think in modern days, we now see more than ever different depictions of Jesus. It was not that way early on.
No.
And the reason why that is for people like me who look at the Bible and say, gosh, I ain't white, so am I not as close to God? Or, they're, think about it. I mean, children that look at this, I mean, that's what we think. And so then when
Well, that's not the Bible. That's the artistic renderings of Bible stories. If you
I get
read the
that as an
Bible,
adult, I totally understand that now. But as a kid, when I looked at that, that was everything to me. That is
yeah, the pictures there were bad. Yeah.
absolutely, that was the first thing that I went to, and it definitely caused some pause and separation. And because I am a curious person, I dug deeper. But I can't say that for everyone that I talk to
like
and have
us.
discussions with.
I never would have given it a thought as a kid.
Right.
Why would I?
Right, exactly.
Let me give you
Grow
let me
older and get smarter, you do.
it looks like Susan wants to say something, then I want to throw a monkey wrench into the whole
Oh,
thing.
thanks a lot, Bob.
Well, I'm going to probably be throwing a bit of a, not a big monkey, but just saying, also as children, whenever we're brought up seeing different depictions, and then we learn there's lots of other depictions, I think that as a child, until you see something else, you don't think that you're picturing this person because of a power that you think your white people should be in power of. I think you're just thinking, oh, it's Jesus, and Jesus loves everybody. I think that's the way I felt growing up. And in many ways, it's naive, but it is a child's look. But I'm just saying, I do think that in some views it was done as a power thing, but I'm just saying I don't think it was always conceived that way in the minds of the artist. That's all.
Well, and the
Well, I
original
don't think they
question
even
was,
knew about it.
the
I
original
think,
question was I don't know when Saint Augustine of Canterbury was alive, but the original question was there evidence that anyone intentionally drew Saint Augustine of Africa to look like European, or was there some evidence that people were at that point literally confused about which Saint Augustine they were
no, no, no.
about or
That
depicting?
this is pretty simple.
Okay,
There's no internet, there's no
right,
telephone, there's no
right,
printing press. You talk to an artist who may be illiterate and not even able to read. Oh, I was born in Carthage. Oh, I thought Carthage was on the other side of that big sea.
right.
Oh, those are where those North Africans. Oh, they're, the illiterate culture. I tried to look up when was stained glass introduced. This is another context. That's how they taught the Bible stories.
Yeah.
Well, they originated mostly in Europe, by the
Right.
way, not in Africa. Maybe if they had originated in Africa, we'd have a clearer picture of who St. Augustine was. But these are European artists. They're only modeled. Maybe they'd only seen white people. That's what they're going to put in the picture. I'm not saying they do it consciously, except that the culture imposes on them a false narrative, and they do the best that they can. So, but after a while, when you know the truth and you don't correct it, then you're participating in that power. By the way, I do believe Constantine was about power. And,
Oh yeah.
and let's just say this. This is the monkey wrench I was going to throw in this. There's a great book called Saving Paradise by Rita Nakashima Brock and
Oh my gosh.
Rebecca Parker. The
Oh,
first 300 or 400 years of the of Christianity's existence after Jesus, guess how the world is depicted? There's the world, and then there's heaven. And heaven is depicted as a kind of perfected world.
Mhm.
It's beautiful. It's bucolic. It has lambs in it. It has smiling people. There's angels everywhere. It's lovely. There's no hell. There's no hell. And there's no violence on the cross. The cross becomes an instrument, and then military imagery is put into place after Constantine. And then the rest of, we get back to our normal status of affair of killing each other and figuring out good reasons to do that. No, I'm being facetious, of course. We get into being different and saying our difference is better than your difference, blah, blah, blah. And then the Christian culture absorbs these military metaphors and also the crucifixion as the central symbol of the faith. But that was not the case in art for the first 300 to 400 years of its existence.
yes. And Rita, who's actually a friend of Bob's and mine and has preached at First Christian Church, talked about the cross being capital punishment. I was just sort of like so stunned by this. And she said, well, if we updated this, we would all, wear little things on necklaces that had electric chairs. And that was
Yep.
such a profound, sort of notion. So, hey, Anthony, a quick question for you. In your church in Wyandotte County, how was Jesus depicted?
I don't remember seeing photos of Jesus at church. I remember seeing a cross, but I don't remember seeing photos.
Okay.
Well, not photos, but
Not
pictures.
photos, but paintings.
Images.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I don't remember seeing images of Jesus at my church as a kid, but I do remember what I was going to finish saying earlier was that when I went to my aunt's house, she had a picture of Jesus with dreadlocks. And I wanted to tie that back to what
Really?
Bob was saying. And that's why I feel like it was really important, because when I saw that, I was like, it gave me wonder. It gave me pause. I thought, wow. So what am I missing? Something's not consistent somewhere. And so it just gave me reason to dig a little deeper to really kind of discover. So great question. I don't recall seeing any images of Christ in.
By the way, Anthony, I grew up, I think you know this, in a completely, well, 95 to 98% Catholic culture in South Texas, okay?
Wow.
And I adopted Catholic practices, but not for good reasons. In Little League, when my buddies and I were going past the Catholic church, they'd all do this, cross themselves. We're not even on the playing field.
Huh.
This is what their families taught them. Why? I'd have to go to seminary to understand, because the host, the body of Jesus, is in that church, in that Catholic church. There's a piece of Jesus in there. And so you need to honor. And I thought that's pretty interesting and pretty a way to kind of incorporate your faith into your daily life. I only did it because I thought it'd bring my batting average up, because I thought they did it. I'm going to do it too.
Did it
Mine
help?
was completely superstitious, but I adopted that culture unbeknownst to me almost, just because my friends were doing it.
And if I saw you doing that and took a picture of it and posted it everywhere and said, Bob's a Catholic and blah, 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 people would have believed it.
Yeah, maybe.
With no context, and not knowing that actually he was trying to be respectful and responsible to his friend more than anything.
No, I
feel like
wasn't.
you like
You're being too
that.
generous to me. No, I was trying to fit in, and I was trying to make my baseball life much more successful.
But that's actually a classic example of how people grow up with their
That
religious
is
traditions
precisely what-
without understanding where they came
That's what-
from
Exactly.
or what
Exactly.
they're about.
We've
And
come
She
full
made the
circle
meatloaf
there.
in a certain
Yeah.
pan because that's what her
It's-
mother always did.
But it's
That was
also
the
too,
Bargain.
think about communication and the lack thereof. See, today we have resources like the television, the phone, the social media, email, et cetera, et cetera. These people back in those days had none of that. But even then, well, even now, we still don't communicate.
I was going to say, it's still no better today than it was then.
We still struggle. And it's just like,
Yeah, now it's just everywhere,
God,
mixed up.
yeah, it's amazing.
Well, and
I did have a question for Bob. Do you know any validity to maybe African generated or populated materials that told that story, that may have had images or different depictions at all? Because I hear us talk about the European side, but
We lost Bob again.
David,
Huh?
It's bad internet zone. So
David,
Oh, I
Oh.
thought you were gonna know
he's
about-
coming back.
back
oh
there he
no,
is.
he left.
Oh, I
He's back
think-
now.
I didn't think so.
Did you hear my question, Bob?
Bob's muted.
You're muted.
I was looking
You
at-
know, this is what makes me want to believe in a literal devil, because the
He
problem.
literally kicked you off.
I do believe in a literal evil. I believe evil is a force in the world. I just don't put a tail and a pitchfork in the hand of a
No, it
There we go
personage.
again.
It has an electrical cord that goes to the wall and
He
to
has
the
a He
wireless.
has a pitchfork. He's all red.
Yeah, there we go. That's a Halloween costume. That's not a real entity in the world. But anyway, what were we talking about that I missed? Anything?
What was your question, Anthony?
So what I was asking is, are there, I guess, stories produced by North African people about St. Augustine?
They rely so heavily. Wait a minute. There's one that's very interesting, and it's mythological. Let me look at my notes. I have it right here. They rely upon his words. Remember, we've got 5 million words to look at, right?
Yeah.
And his confessions is as good an account of a human life as you can get in the 4th century. So where is it? Oh yeah. This story of him being ordained immediately. they tell that with great pride in Hippo
Mm,
and in North Africa.
mm.
He was evidently so saintly, and that not just saintly, he was so obviously a leader that he needs to be ordained right now. And he had only been a Christian, I think, 4 years, and they ordained him immediately. And then 4 years later, he's the bishop adjutor, and then later he's 2 years later he's the bishop. I mean, he's bishop by the age of 42, and has a 28-year tenure as bishop. So, so that was a myth that he was ordained right then. And that comes from, I think, Anthony, North Africa. But to my knowledge, they rely, even in North Africa, more on his confessions,
Mhm.
the 13 books of the confessions, and of some accounts of his life outside. It would have been nice if Jerome had written something about him, but he didn't. And Jerome was one of the great historians of the church. He's earlier than somebody like Jerome had written about him. But to my knowledge, from what I've done in my research, maybe I could look into that encyclopedia a little bit more carefully to see the roots of North African source material about him. But to my knowledge, all of the experts are American, British, and European.
It's just definitely, yeah, I'd love to know what material came from North Africa. And I think that could also kind of shine light too on perspective and how things originate and how stories are told.
Yeah.
And things just
Well, part of this,
Yeah.
if do you believe everything that Augustine says? Now, yes, but we have to interpret it because he's full of passion in his writing as well in the subject matter of his lasciviousness, if you will, or his own concupiscence, as he calls it, his lustfulness in his life. Does he exaggerate? Does he not tell us everything? Autobiography is a tricky thing.
Yeah.
It's not viewed as objective and as trustworthy as somebody else.
You
Now,
also said he went back and edited a
and
lot.
he edited exactly. Yeah.
Do you think that when he said conceived in sin, when he was talking about, I believe there was a connection with sex and childbirth?
Oh yeah. Yeah. He describes it. He describes Mary could not be the bearer of Christ had she been inseminated by a human being. She wasn't.
Speaking of the ordinance of marriage, have you?
No, I mean by the way, his mistress was more like a concubine, and even the second one was, and this was kind of the de rigueur. This was normal life back then. You had this. Um, you didn't have bigamy or polygamy. You didn't have polygamy, but you had these understood ways of the power structure of people with means and of certain classes. One reason that Monica objected to this unnamed mistress that he lived with for more than 10 years, I think 12, and they had a child together, is that she was not of his class and he was marrying beneath himself and he should not marry her. Not just because he was 18, but because 17 when she became pregnant, 18 when the baby was born, but because she was not of his class. She was not worthy of him.
Really?
Did I get the facts right? Did his father and his son die both at the same age?
No, not the same time, but
Same age.
Same age is what I meant, sorry.
no, his father
He
was
17, when Augustine was 17.
And his son died at the age of 17.
17.
Got it. Okay.
at 17, yes.
Got it. Okay. That's all I got.
So you all are such extraordinary people because here we are, going on an hour and a half and we're still deep into it. And I want to leave this sort of thought. So no answers are required. But if we were to write our own confessions, how many volumes would it be?
Got 10
Oh,
volumes of
oh, dear God.
confessions. Confess it to God.
I would say I'm going to quote a poster I saw recently. I won't even contextualize it, but the poster was just words that said, "Ugh, where do I even start?"
True, true.
You don't.
Oh, gosh.
I'm not doing it. Don't
Mine
do
would be saying, not to be published.
Yeah. So Bob is, I'm always reminded who Bob Hill is whenever we do these great souls and great prayers. And I hold him in the highest regard and deepest respect because if this is a new inaugural, great soul, it was a damn fine presentation. So
Amen.
it. Amen.
When is our next one? That's what I want. I need like Louis Armstrong said, don't ask me to be creative, just give me a deadline.
That's a good one.
Gosh, that spoke to me. Jeez.
And
Wow.
Sounds like emails I've heard, seen and
I
read.
think the next one is the 20th
Of July, yes,
of July, and we're doing Tony Campolo.
yes.
You will love Tony Campolo, and we'll be able to you won't have to do it. You don't have to do it. You don't have to like it, but I'm going to swear when we do the presentation on Tony Campolo to tell a very, very famous story of him.
Okay.
And you'll see how appropriate it is to swear when I tell that story.
So Bob, before we get out, you promised a story about Priscilla and New Orleans and
Oh,
So
we
let's have a
went.
quick version of the story, and then maybe somebody in the library can close with
Yeah.
a prayer.
Priscilla and I were down there for to observe and celebrate our anniversary, and we went to St. Aug's, as it's called, St. Aug's Catholic Church. And we were in there, and this was the Saints were playing a home game that day at 12 noon. So the priest, who was a very good preacher, Catholics are not known for being good preachers. A friend of mine was here in Kansas City. I said, "Man, Pat, you are a great preacher, although that's not saying much here in Kansas City among your peers."
Oh
So
my.
he's a Catholic priest. So they depend upon the mass, not the preaching. But this guy was a great preacher. We had a great service. The choir was wonderful and did songs. And then he said, "Do we have any guests here?" And we raised our hands, and some other people did. And he went around and interviewed everybody.
Oh my.
And then he interviewed me. Priscilla's very quiet. She doesn't want to do this. She doesn't mess with this public stuff. And I said, "Well, we're here celebrating our anniversary." He says, "Oh." And so the whole congregation sang happy anniversary to us. That was lovely. That was very unusual. Um, and then he gave the benediction, and then the choir took off their choir robes and to display that they had all of their New Orleans Saints swag on. And they did a pep rally in the chancel. Who dat? Who dat say they're going to beat them Saints? Who dat? Who dat say they're going to beat them Saints? And music for about 15 minutes. And I said, "Man, this is a way to do church. I love this."
Wow.
Go Chiefs.
Yeah, go Chiefs. There we go.
Oh, my.
Okay, who wants to send us out? Or-
Somebody new.
Dear Lord, we thank you for this chance to come together, and thank you for someone always reminding us that we do need to shut up and go home. But we also are grateful to Bob for joining us and for continuing to expand our horizons and our understanding of both ourselves, the world around us, and the world that preceded us. And so we thank you as we now head out to our own agendas for the rest of the day and continue to keep you with us as we continue to learn and become the people you would have us to be. And we ask that in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
However
Amen.
he may appear.
Thank you, Bob. Hard work. Thank you.
That's okay. When I used to go around to the church around the corner when we didn't go to our regular church, which is that.
Oh. Well, now I can't see anybody else, huh?
Well, anyway, good to be with you. When are you back in town?
Well, actually, if we can finish getting packed, I think most of the medical stuff's done for right now. And so we should be leaving Tuesday and
Okay.
getting there late Wednesday night.
Okay.
Do you know if they rescheduled the board meeting? Because I heard it was canceled.
I'm
Not
not,
board, not board, cabinet is what I meant to say.
yeah, I'm not aware. So,
Just curious. How are you doing?
good. Let me, I might end the meeting because